Hello, welcome back to section 3 of this PFM auditing training. So we're now ready then to get into the nitty-gritty of the auditing of the system. Section 2 we talked about all the paperwork you need to gather, and so now we have that, we can start doing the necessary checks that we need, and you should be able to do it all from the paperwork provided. It may be that you need to go back to the PFM operator to ask for additional information, but hopefully we can do everything we need from the paperwork provided. So in this section we're looking at balances, making sure the system balances in different ways. So the paperwork I need you to lay your hands on are first of all the summary balance sheet report. You can see it up in the top right hand corner. It's year-end report number 3. Secondly, we need to get the final bank statement for the period end. So that's the bank statement from your bank, the one on the right being from Lloyd's, the one that goes up to the year end point. And then last of all, we need to get the bank reconciliation report that was done by your operator at year end. As you can see from the printout, it's called the transaction reconciliation listing, but we generally refer to it as the bank rec report. Best practice and what we advise is that these two are stapled together, so hopefully if you can find the final bank statement for the financial year, on the back of it you will find the reconciliation listing. If not, maybe it's in a different file, but these are the three that we're going to need to do our balance checks, so make sure you've got those to hand. So first thing we're going to look at is purely the question, is our system in balance? This confirms then that all the transactions have been accurately entered and very importantly dated within the appropriate financial year. It makes sure that there's nothing missing, nothing has been left out, meaning that it's not been posted appropriately on the system, and it's essential then for transparency and compliance. And prevents us obviously filing financial misstatements. So it's nice and straightforward. All we need to do is use the summary balance sheet that's showing on your right hand side, and the way to see if it's in balance are simply these two figures across the bottom. One figure is taken from the opening balance and the movement in period, and the other figure is taken from what's being shown in your various bank accounts. Therefore, the two figures should be in balance at year end. If they are, hop onto your spreadsheet and just confirm that. Let's hop over to the spreadsheet just to see that section. So here's our spreadsheet that we looked at earlier, the little checklist for you to follow when you're doing the auditing. We're on section 3 then. So literally, is the system in balance at year end? Check the summary balance sheet. So you would put a tick here into your spreadsheet. If at this point you find a summary balance sheet that is not in balance, then we of course need to know why, and really this needs to be resolved before continuing with auditing the system. So the first thing was, has an explanation been given? It may well be that the operator of the system knows why the summary balance sheet is not in balance and has attached some kind of narrative or an explanation, or when you ask them about it, has that information to hand, in which case we would need to document it. It is almost always to do with incorrectly dated transactions and specifically receipts. And the most common one then is people receive some money, let's say towards the very end of the financial year. Say they received it on the 30th of the month, and they don't actually take it to the bank until the beginning of the following month, which in this case would also be the beginning of the following financial year. That gives us a problem in that we record that we've received the money, but we don't record that the money's been banked until the new financial year. If this is the case, the operator should be able to simply look at their paying in archive, locate this imbalance, be able to document it, and if you wish, they can either make a correction or they can simply add it to the year-end notes to indicate why there is a difference. If it's out of balance though and the operator doesn't really know why, you would need to ask them, this is all in your notes, to run a new summary balance sheet dated with this date that's way in the future. And what that will tell us is if it's now in balance, it means for sure that an incorrect date has been entered, something beyond the financial year end. So then they can go off, run an audit trail, find the incorrect date and make the necessary adjustments, or just write a note to the accounts. If, however, it is still not in balance at this very far in the future date, then it almost certainly means a transaction has gone in without a date, and so they'd need to contact ISTech in order to get some support to put that right. But chances are your balance sheet, summary balance sheet, will be in balance because your operator has ensured that before completing year end. So we know now the system is in balance. Step 2 with our balances then is, do we, on the private fund manager, agree with the bank? This is very important to check because the bank is of course an external source of reference for us. So the bank knows what money has gone in and out and what the balance is, and therefore if we can agree to that, we've got a third party's balances to work towards. So agreeing with the bank is very important, and indeed for PFM operators they should be on a monthly basis doing bank reconciliations to make sure that the PFM agrees with the bank statements received. It ensures accuracy and completeness of our records, so it makes sure that everything has been recorded properly, nothing's been missed out, nothing's been duplicated, etc. Because when we constantly check back to the bank, we know that our data set is correct. So what we'll need for this then, we will need the paper statement. This happens to be a Lloyd's one. We'll need the final paper statement that you had at year end, and it will have a final balance at the year end point. So we'll locate it, make a note of that. We're then going to compare it then to the private fund manager, and for that we need the bank reconciliation report, which is called, as you'll remember, the transaction reconciliation listing. And we're interested in then the statement closing balance figure. So it's the balance that comes after all the items that were reconciled on this final bank statement, and it will be a statement closing balance figure. It's not the one at the very bottom, it's not the cash book balance, it's the statement closing balance. And clearly the two figures should be exactly the same. It means that at year end you did a final bank reconciliation and agreed to the correct figure. So that's really important. If those are the same, we go to our little spreadsheet, our checklist, and we write those figures in to confirm that we are in agreement. However, the last thing we have to look at is unreconciled items, and this is so important, and this is one area that we get a lot of questions at year end, so please do take a moment to digest this. There will be, on everyone's accounting system, some unreconciled items. That simply means there are things that were recorded within the financial year, but they have not yet appeared on a paper statement. So examples would be, you wrote a whole load of refunds to students for a trip, but you did it at the end of the financial year, so just the last week of term, let's say, you wrote a whole load of cheques for £3.95. For a start, chances are that quite a lot of parents will never cash that £3.95 cheque. The ones that do, it's not going to be a priority, it'll be something they perhaps get around to at some point, and it therefore means on your accounting system all of those checks for £3.95 have been included. They have to be included. That's accounting rules. However, the bank knows nothing about them because they've not yet appeared. And so there will always be this kind of difference between what the bank knows and what is real. Same thing goes if you have an online payment system and you link into Private Fund Manager on a daily basis. You could potentially have lots and lots of payments from parents who are paying things off towards the end of the financial year. However, online payment providers only settle with you once a week. So there could easily be a situation where the Private Fund Manager has lots of payments from parents, but as of yet that's not appeared on a bank statement because your online payment provider hasn't yet given you that money. So what I'm kind of attempting to get across really here is that it's very unusual to have a system where the bank has a figure that is exactly the same as your accounting system, because the bank has no knowledge of your unreconciled items. Remember that then when you start looking at reports, the figure on the reports for the different bank accounts is real. It takes into account everything that will eventually happen to that bank account, whereas the bank statement from the bank has no knowledge of that. So we have to be aware of the unreconciled items at year end because that feeds into our various reports. Let's go across to the right hand side and look. So we had a bank statement that had 4 items on it, and the statement closing balance was this £11,918. However, I had a whole load of checks and actually a bit of tuition fees that we recorded on the system, but the bank does not yet know about because it's not been presented at the bank. They total this 230 figure. So in reality, my proper real year-end bank figure is the lower figure. It's the statement closing balance plus or minus any unpresented items. So unreconciled items are important, and the cash book balance is the real cash figure. And so what we have to do is compare that figure, the bottom of the two figures, with the bank figure that appears on the summary balance sheet, and those two figures should be exactly the same. Let's hop back to our spreadsheet. So as you can see, the questions are: does the final bank balance equal the bank reconciliation report? What is the figure? What are your unreconciled items? Write the figure. And does the bank statement plus or minus the unreconciled items equal the summary balance sheet? Write the figure. So we know what we're looking for. We're looking for unreconciled items and a final balance that agrees in the different parts of the system. But again, what happens if you go through that process and they're not the same? Well, again, it's invariably something to do with incorrectly dated transactions. So when you look at the unreconciled items, which is on the bank rec report, the transaction reconciliation list, you need to look down the dates. And invariably what you're going to find is the very last one goes beyond the year-end date. That's the most common cause of not being the same figure. And if that is the case, then you'll simply need to, on the report, or a copy of the report, or on your auditor report, make a note that actually we have to add back or subtract, or whatever way it goes, a certain figure because it's post year end. And then we should end up with a cash book balance that does equal the correct figure. Last comment I'm just going to make is, so we've gone through that process with our voluntary fund bank account, but if you have other bank accounts for the voluntary fund, you would need to do exactly the same process for each of them. So if you had, I don't know, a savings account or some other account attached to voluntary funds, again, you would need to go through that process of checking the balance, checking the unreconciled item. Does it come back to the same figure? And you'd need to do exactly the same thing if you operate a petty cash tin on Private Fund Manager. And by that I mean, do you record all the monies in, all the monies out of the petty cash tin, giving you a balance? If that is the case, and again, you'll need to do this checking and balancing process for your petty cash tin. Obviously, you don't have a bank statement to work from that, but your alternative then is that you would count the cash in the tin, and that would be your closing balance figure at year end. Okay, so that's section 3, a really important part of the auditing process, which is simply checking that the system is in balance, that it balances to the bank statements, and that your ledger balances are correct. In our next section, section 4, we're going to move on then to the top half really of the balance sheet, which is to look at opening and closing balances and how we check those.